Hi, I'm going to read a story today. It's a little bit longer than the other ones I've read. It's called The Moonbow of Mr. B. Bones, and it's by J. Patrick Lewis, illustrated by Dirk Zimmer. It's a nice little story. It's full of wisdom and magic, and it's a Kentucky mountain tale. And it's about a rare natural phenomenon that happens at the Cumberland Gap. Some of you may have seen it. Some of you here in Kentucky may have gone to the Moonbow. Okay, the Moonbow. In the middle of every Indian summer, an old man rode out of the mountains and into the Gap, a village lying deep in the bottomlands. Bartholomew Bones was his name, and he came with his mule and his wagon. Here's old Bartholomew. See his picture? Nice illustrations in this book. Little bits of everything filled that wagon. Pumpkins and horseshoes, beeswax candles and foot-long matches, poem books and hand lotions, pots and pans, and wooden spoons. And beneath the usual items lay what folk had waited all summer to see, a sack full of magic jars with mysterious labels: sundrops, snow rays, moonbows, rain flakes, and whistling wind. From the barber shop to the fire station and all the houses in between, the Gap was filled with the mountain man's jars. They were kept shiny as ice and ready for show, and the magic was sealed in tight. Every boy and girl bought them, and you could tell by their bulging pockets and fat lunch bags that a peculiar kind of luck came from just carrying the jars around. And here's a picture of the street and some of the jars. But all that changed the year Tommy Morgan moved in. On a June afternoon, too hot to hurry, he sprang up from nowhere. Leaning against the old water pump, he twirled a yo-yo, a silver beauty with diamonds into perfect loop-the-loops and cannonballs and backward round the worlds. Said he'd lived in a dozen towns up and down the mountains, and he had seen just about everything there was worth seeing. All that day and on through the summer, the Gap gang sat on the drop edge of wonder listening to his stories. And here he is saying he's seen it all. You probably know somebody like that. A week or so on the other side of Halloween, the wind let up and it got warm enough to sweat. Faithful as a grandfather clock, Bartholomew Bones' wagon rumbled out of the woods. As he set up camp, girls and boys swarmed on him like molasses, welcoming him home. All except Tommy, who stood back, taking big bites out of an apple, just waiting to make something happen. "What you selling, mister?" he asked, loud enough to quiet the commotion. The old man looked the new boy over. "Depends on what you're buying," he said, and he turned away to sell his first sundrops of the season to the collar guardians. Oh, excitement with the doggies. "I'm interested in one of those secret weather bottles," Tommy butted in. "What'll it be? Whistling wind? Rain flakes?" said the old man, rummaging through his wagon. Tommy shrugged his shoulders. "Any of 'em'll do." Then he paid his 10 cents and got himself a jar of moonbows in return. And here he is, buying him a jar of moonbows for Mr. Bones. What happens next, guys? Jess Fry, Polly Hazlett, and the rest of the Gap gang were bunched up in line, eager to get new bottles. No one was ready for what happened next. Tommy lay back in the grass close to the wagon and tilted his jar in the sunlight. He squinted his eyes nearly shut, but he couldn't see a thing inside. "I wonder what a moonbow looks like," he said, running his finger over the label. "Is there liquid or powder in here? What's it supposed to be?" But he didn't wait for anybody to answer. "Maybe there ain't much glitter to the thing in daylight anyway," he laughed to himself and started to unfasten the lid. Uh-oh, now what? The Gap went dead still. Polly gulped air, and half a dozen boys next to her went stiff as statues. The old man waved his arms and was about to yell something, but it was too late. Tommy snapped the wire back, and for the first time in the history of the Gap, the lid popped off one of Bartholomew Bones' magic jars. Here he is opening the jar. Nothing came out. Tommy peeked inside, smacked the bottom, shook it hard. Still nothing. And the quiet grew louder. "It's empty," Tommy shouted, though he didn't sound at all surprised. "Mr. Beans, or whatever your name is, what do you think you're selling here?" The mountain man handed the boy his 10 cents back. "Maybe you got a bad jar," was all he said. Tommy looked up the long line of bottle buyers. Jess pulled out his old Whistling Wind and rubbed it against his shirt. Polly stared hard at Tommy, then at the half pints of the prize rain flakes she held in her each hand. "Maybe they're all bad jars," said Tommy. He stuck the dime in his pocket, tossed the worthless bottle of Moonbows back in the wagon, and sauntered on home. Here they are looking at their bottles of magic now, wondering, is mine any good? The rest of that day, Mr. Bones sold only 1 ball of string, a honey dipper, and 2 good poem books. Instead of trying to trade stories with him, boys and girls suddenly remembered important chores and drifted away. When the Gap was nearly deserted, the old man looked at his pocket watch and shuffled down the red brick street for the last time. "1 jar of Moonbows left," he shouted, stopping at each doorway. "On sale for a nickel, and it'll last a lifetime." But by then, nearly everyone pretended to be too busy to turn around. So Bartholomew Bones packed the wagon and led his mule out of the Gap. Now Polly was sitting on her front porch when Mr. Bones rode by. Though the dark grew tall in the trees, she could see he'd stopped his mule in the shadows by the waterfall. It looked like he was emptying a bottle into the creek. But Polly'd had enough mystery for one day, and she was tired. She rubbed her eyes and went inside. And here he is, dumping that 1 jar out by the waterfalls. You know the waterfalls at Cumberland Gap? I bet that's where it was. Later that night, frost crawled up the window panes. True winter was in the air. The Gap had gone to sleep when a voice rang out near the edge of the woods. Houses lit up. Windows and doors flew open. There beside the woodpile was Polly, who'd gone out to get another log for the stove. "Look, up there at the moon. Can you see it? It's a moonbow. A moonbow!" Her voice echoed down the hollow. There's everybody coming out to see what she's talking about. Here's a picture. It's a moonbow over the waterfall. Wow. One by one, folks in nightgowns and pajamas leaned out of windows or shivered on the sidewalk, gawking at the sky. Nobody noticed the boy standing perfectly still at the foot of the waterfall. Bundled up in a blanket, he traced with his finger the curve of white light as it fell over the mountains. Looks like Tommy, doesn't it? 2 hours later, when the street was quiet again and everyone had gone back inside, the boy who said he'd seen everything that was worth seeing took one last look. Then Tommy Morgan bunched up his blanket and went home. The old man never returned, but on certain nights ever since, the Gap fills up with folks from miles around, come to see what some call the Moonbow of Mr. B. Bones. When they ask what causes this strange white hoop of light, one boy tells the story best. Hello. You listening to the Moonbow story? Yeah, she came in to hear the story, but I'm all finished now. There can be no fog or rain, just the cool mist off the waterfall. 1,000 stars are flying with the moon in the sky, says Tommy Morgan, pointing up into the mountains. The sky must be clear as a glass jar. And that's the end. And that was the Moonbow of Mr. B. Bones. What you looking at? Mwah.